Dani had slipped into a rare season she dared to call peace, not the kind born from everything being perfect, but the kind purchased with scratches, concessions, and hard-won endurance. She had learned how to smile while her heart still throbbed, how to stand straight while fear threaded itself into every breath. The BRCA test result had once been a black smear across the center of her new page, but Dani and Andre had done what many couples never manage. They refused to let worrying become identity. Refused to let illness tighten into a noose around the future. Dani didn't deny her panic, but she didn't allow it to command her either. Every morning, she reminded herself that she was still here, that Andre was still here, that Chelsea was still here. And when Chelsea got engaged, Dani felt as if someone had pushed open the heavy door in her chest just enough for light to pour in. A wedding wasn't merely an event, it was proof that her family could still move forward, could still dream beyond fear. Dani began sketching the future again with guest lists, fabric swatches, color palettes, and the small details that made her feel like she had her hands back on the steering wheel of her life. She didn't know that this very sense of control could be crushed by nothing more than a doorbell. Because in Fairmont Crest, no one rings your bell at the exact moment you're happy without carrying a purpose. And Dani understood that rule by pure instinct, the instinct of someone who had lived too long inside a gilded fishbowl where the sharks never swim straight, only circle. When the chime echoed, Andre looked at Dani on reflex. Dani felt a cold wire slide down her spine, as if her body already knew that peace was only a pause before someone pulled a trigger. Security was paid to keep strangers out. Staff were paid not to open the door to danger. And yet the bell rang again, neat, firm, and final, like a sentence being read aloud. The first question detonated in Dani's mind: who would dare to come at the one moment she was stepping into a new chapter and who had cleared the way for them? Without even checking the camera, Dani could feel this wasn't an accident. In a place like Fairmont Crest, accident was just the polite word for intent disguised well enough to pass. When the door opened, the person standing there wasn't Bill. It wasn't Haley. And that fact made Dani angry in a different way, more dangerous than the anger she'd saved for either of them. If it had been Bill, she already had a drawer in her mind reserved for him. The drawer of the past, where she could pull out old rage and fling it straight into his face. If it had been Haley, she had a map for her too. Someone who hunted for other people's cracks and slipped into them like toxic smoke. But the face in front of Dani belonged to someone she never expected to find on the threshold of her present life. A woman with a calm so polished it felt provocative. Eyes that showed no surprise at seeing Dani, as if she had rehearsed this moment in her head 100 times. The woman addressed Andre first, not Dani, and that single detail made Dani feel pushed aside inside her own home. Andre froze, not out of courtesy, but out of pain, the kind that happens when an old wound is pressed at exactly the right point. And Dani saw the truth in that reaction immediately. This visitor hadn't come because of Dani. At least not at first. She had come because of Andre, or because of an Andre Dani had never been allowed to see in full. For one brief second, Dani felt like someone standing on a floor that had just revealed a hollow chamber beneath it. They had survived so much. They had promised each other there were no secrets left big enough to kill trust. Yet Andre's eyes now looked like a door slamming shut. The woman didn't circle or soften. She didn't come to congratulate anyone. She came to set something thin on the table, sealed inside a stiff envelope like evidence, or a debt being collected. Dani hadn't even formed the question before the woman looked straight at her, and the look wasn't the petty confrontation Dani had grown used to in Fairmont Crest. It was the look of someone who knew she was holding a noose in her hand. Dani recognized the most dangerous kind of threat, not someone who wanted to destroy, but someone who could destroy while keeping an air of morality intact. The woman didn't need to shout. Her face said she didn't have to, because truth was what made people choke. Dani hated that most of all. She hated being dragged into a play when she hadn't been given the script. She hated that someone could walk into her home carrying something that made Andre go silent. And she hated, most of all, the sensation that no matter how strong she was, she still had a place in her armor that could be punctured with nothing but an envelope. She tried to keep her voice steady, but inside her anger began to change color from heat to ice, from eruption to calculation. Cold anger always led to dangerous decisions. At last, the woman revealed her true intent. She hadn't come to ruin love. She had come to return what belongs to you. According to her, it belonged to Dani, yet it had passed through Andre's hands and been buried under silence for far too long. Dani took the envelope, and it felt like holding cold metal. The name printed on the corner of the document dimmed her vision in a single heartbeat. Bill? One name was enough to make everything inside Dani coil. Bill had no right to appear in her life again, not even as a shadow. Bill was a past she had worked too hard to place in its proper grave, and now his name lay in her hands like a spark ready to catch on everything she had rebuilt. She looked at Andre, and in his eyes she saw the fatigue of someone who had carried this alone for too long. He didn't deny it, he didn't argue, he didn't explain. He simply stood there like a man who knew he'd left a bomb beneath the floor and still hoped it would never detonate. And that hurt Dani more than the idea of betrayal itself. Andre had chosen silence not because he wanted to harm her, but because he believed he was protecting her. Yet that protection was its own form of control, its own decision made on her behalf about what she was allowed to know and what she wasn't. Dani felt insulted in the very role she had earned as wife, mother, and survivor. She had endured society's contempt, stood back up after public falls, and yet inside her own home she was being treated like someone too fragile to handle the truth. Now Dani's anger stopped pointing at Bill and began to spiral toward Andre, toward the man she loved, and the way he had whispered just this once to the past and then let it follow him all the way to their front door. As if she knew exactly where to press, the woman dropped one more line that seemed to suck the air out of the room. The file involved the testing not only Dani's, but signs of possible interference, and Bill had once been closer to that pipeline than Dani wanted to admit. BRCA, the thing Dani believed she had controlled with knowledge and planning, suddenly became psychological bait, a weapon for blackmail or manipulation. Dani's heart slammed so hard it hurt. Not because she feared illness, but because she felt someone using her deepest fear as a lever. The woman didn't need to threaten outright. Her very presence was the threat. She knew the address, which meant she had someone inside the Fairmont Crest system or inside Dani's circle. She knew about BRCA, which meant there was a leak in the privacy Dani had trusted. She carried Bill's name, which meant dirty hands from the past could still reach into the present. Dani started to study everything around her like a crime scene. Which guard was on duty? Which staff member had taken a call? Who Chelsea had spoken to? Who benefited if Dani lost control at the exact moment Chelsea's wedding was taking shape? And a thought flashed, so cold it made her skin tighten. Weddings, the symbol of a future, were also the most perfect stage for a public collapse. A rumor about BRCA could be inflated into a dangerous hereditary disease. A story could be twisted into Dani had her condition to control her daughter. One leaked page could become scandal. And then Chelsea would be dragged down beside her mother, turned into a pawn on someone else's board. Dani's throat went dry. She knew the people like Bill, like Haley, like whoever was behind them. They always struck at the real weakness, Chelsea. Suddenly Dani remembered Chelsea's bright excitement over invitations, guest lists, the perfection she wanted. If Chelsea was hiding something, if her fiancé was connected to this woman, or connected to Bill and old debts, then Dani wasn't merely threatened. She was forced into a choice: protect Chelsea through silence, or save her family by exposing a truth that could kill the wedding. Andre looked at Dani as if begging for a chance to explain, but Dani couldn't tell what made her angrier: the untold story, or the fact that Andre had allowed someone else to reach their doorstep before he spoke first. The woman continued to play messenger, but Dani could see she wasn't innocent. No one brings a file at this exact moment without wanting something: money, status, acclaim. A way to pull Andre back into an old promise. Or worse, she wanted to use Dani as a blade to stab Bill, and in her eyes Dani was merely the tool. That possibility made Dani burn. She refused to be anyone's instrument. She was exhausted of being yanked between Bill and Power Wars. Yet if the file was real, if there were signs of manipulated results, if someone had touched her medical data, then this wasn't just social drama. This was a violation of her body, her rights, her ownership of her own truth. Dani's anger hardened into a sharp, focused resolve. She would not let anyone use BRCA like a whip. She would not let Chelsea's wedding become an arena. She would not let Andre be dragged backward by a debt he thought could be buried. But that resolve pushed her into gray territory. To strike back, she would have to sacrifice the calm she had finally earned. She would have to rip open the past Andre feared. She would have to accept that Bill might not be merely a villain, but a link in a larger chain, one where whoever stood behind it all profited most. When Dani panicked, Dani stood in the living room with the envelope in her hand, eyes fixed on Andre. And for the first time in a long time, she felt she didn't know how much of his life he had hidden. Andre was cornered by his own silence, and a negative reaction began to surface in him. A cold defensiveness, a stiffness. An attempt to reclaim control by asking Dani to trust him one more time without giving her the whole truth yet. Dani, cornered by the feeling of betrayal, reacted in the way she hated most in herself. She wanted to punish, to make Andre hurt enough to understand her hurt. To throw Bill's name at him and demand to know how far Andre had worked with Bill. They had survived so many storms through unity, and now they were being forced onto opposite sides of a fracture line. And the uninvited guest stood there like someone who struck the match and stepped back to watch the blaze. Dani realized the biggest question was no longer who the visitor was, but who had helped her pass through the Fairmont Crest gates, who had given her the address, and who would be the next person to ring the bell. Dani began to see a web of intent. Someone wanted Bill exposed, wanted Haley toppled, wanted Andre to pay a debt, and wanted Dani thrown off balance at the exact moment she was stepping into a new chapter. And when Dani opened the document further, a single line small as a needle stabbed her eyes. A copy had been sent to an email address that did not belong to their family. Dani didn't know whose it was, but she knew one thing with absolute certainty. The game had started long before the doorbell rang. And if Dani didn't strike first, if she didn't find out who was pulling the strings, Chelsea's wedding would become the price. And her love with Andre would be turned into a battlefield where no one won. Only shards were displayed for all of Fairmont Crest to savor.